Dear Chamber members, we're grateful to Congressman Simpson for joining us today on our second Congressional Forum this year. While DC never stops producing headlines, we are definitely in an interesting moment for policymakers. Democratic majorities make up the leadership of both chambers of Congress and have been working to pass President Biden's agenda. Governing by thin majorities, however, has brought some challenges, and we're excited to hear a DC update from Idaho's very own Congressman Simpson. Just a reminder that the Boise Chamber is the only 5-star accredited U.S. chamber member in the state of Idaho. That distinction helps us to advocate and educate on issues that are very important to our members. The programs and services we provide support for 4 core areas: economic vitality, advocacy, education, and member engagement. We are excited to continue to provide high-quality educational content today. It, however, would not be possible without the help of our sponsors. Our presenting series sponsors for this Congressional Forum is Blue Cross of Idaho. We are also sponsored by Intermountain Gas Company, Bank of Idaho, and St. Luke's, co-sponsored by St. Luke's Health Systems, and our contributing sponsors are Boise State University, Idaho Central Credit Union, Micron Technology, St. Alphonsus Health Systems, and the Idaho Housing and Finance Association. And now, a message from our presenting sponsor.
I've always felt more at home on the water. Guiding is about more than just me.
There you go, John, right behind that rock there.
All right, set the hook.
It's about sharing that joy with others. And now, the biggest rush I get is planning our next adventure.
Thank you, Blue Cross. Congressman Simpson is serving his 12th term in the House of Representatives for Idaho's 2nd Congressional District, where he serves on the House Appropriations Committee. He is the ranking member for the Subcommittee on Energy and Water Development and also serves on the Interior and Environmental Subcommittee. These committees have jurisdiction over funding for a number of programs critical to Idaho, including the Department of Energy, the Department of the Interior, the Forest Service, our national parks, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Smithsonian Institute. Simpson is an advocate for a national energy independent policy and supports research and development of improved nuclear energy technologies. Mike has also gained national attention for his bill to split the massive, overburdened Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, as well as his Sawtooth National Recreation Area and Jerry Peak Wilderness Addition Act, which addressed concerns of economic growth and stability for rural Idaho and resolved a long-time wilderness debate over the Boulder White Clouds. Simpson's championed a bill to fix fire borrowing, and his Wildfire Disaster Funding Act was signed into law in 2017. This bill provided historic forest management reforms, including treating wildfires like other natural disasters. Before going to Congress, Mike served in the Blackfoot City Council, state legislature, and was the Speaker of the Idaho House. He was also a dentist and practiced with his father and uncle at Simpson Family Dental in Blackfoot. Simpson married his high school sweetheart, Kathy, and they have been married for over 50 years. Congressman Simpson, thank you for joining the Boise Metro Chamber Congressional Forum. As you are well aware, Congress has been providing big headlines. Would you mind giving an update on what is happening in DC and how that impacts us here in Idaho?
Sure. Thanks you, Jeremy, for inviting me to talk about the congressional update. Before I say anything, let me just say I love that commercial from Blue Cross of Idaho. It reminds me of the last line of A River Runs Through It, where the old man fishing in the river says, "I am haunted by waters." Sounds very familiar to me, but that's a great commercial they put together. Things are just, as you might well expect, things are just a little crazy in Washington, D.C. right now. They've been getting crazier and crazier over the years, but right now I think they've reached a peak. We are busily trying to spend your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren's future. When you look at the amount of money that is being spent by this Congress, it is stunning to me. And frankly, it's kind of scary. Let me take you back to last year when the pandemic hit. Congress, in a bipartisan fashion, passed, I don't know, a couple $100 billion in immediate relief. It was bipartisan. Almost every Republican and Democrat voted for it. We felt that it was necessary to keep employers whole to make sure that they kept their workers on the payroll, even though they might not be working and so forth, but it was necessary for our economy. And then after the first year of this pandemic, things started to improve. And then this last January or February, I guess it was, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle passed a $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, which put hundreds of billions of dollars into accounts of the other pandemic relief activities that we've had, whether it was the PPP program or other things, in accounts that had hundreds of billions of dollars already in them that were not spent. And while I was supportive of doing whatever was necessary to help our economy and keep our economy strong, the reality is that we already had a lot of money in these accounts, and I didn't think that we needed to spend the rest of another 1.9 trillion without knowing how the other money was being spent and what was necessary and in what arenas it was necessary. So I think every Republican voted against this $1.9 trillion relief bill, American Rescue Plan that was put forward. But let's add it up. That's $1.9 trillion we've spent this year. The annual budget of the federal government, the annual discretionary budget, that's money that we spend on every program you can think of, whether it's the Defense Department, Veterans Affairs, Department of Commerce, Department of Energy, Department of Agriculture, name them all. The annual budget, discretionary budget there is about $1.5 trillion. Last year it was 1.4. They bumped it up to 1.5 trillion this year. So that's $1.5 trillion. You add that to 1.9 trillion that we spent. That is $3.4 trillion that will get spent. Then we just passed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, which I'll talk about in just a minute. That brings us up to about $4.6 trillion, something like that. And now they're looking at what's called the reconciliation package, the Build Back Better package, whatever you want to call it, social infrastructure bill. They say it's 1.75. I think when the CBO scores it, it's going to be closer to $4 trillion. So we're getting up to, we're going to spend $8 or $9 trillion this year, which is going to push further and further in debt. When somebody says these programs, whether it's the infrastructure bill or the reconciliation bill that they're looking at, that those are all paid for, that's just simply not true. If you look at the infrastructure bill, which I voted against, even though I have been supportive of trying to do infrastructure improvement over the years, two things. Out of the $1.2 trillion, only about 110 billion of it actually went to traditional infrastructure, roads and bridges and so forth. It was only about a third paid for of the total $1.2 trillion. But the important thing to me is they kick the can down the road. And that is, it is one-time money that is put into this for the third that we're going to pay for. They took some money out of some of the COVID relief accounts that had unspent money in them and moved it over to the infrastructure bill and that kind of stuff. But it still kicked the can down the road in that it was one-time money. And what we need to be looking at is how are you going to replenish the Highway Trust Fund, the Airport Trust Fund, the Inland Waterway Trust Fund, the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. All of those trust funds are being depleted. And in fact, the last few years, we've had to put money out of the general fund into the Highway Trust Fund to keep it whole. It is a challenge that we face. And it's like I've said for years, everybody wants to do an infrastructure bill. Nobody wants to pay for it. But we've got to start thinking outside the box about how we are going to raise the resources necessary on a continuing basis so that we know that we've got the money to do the infrastructure work that needs to be done in this country. I don't deny that it needs to be done. I just think that it was done in a poor manner in this, and that, as I said, they kicked the can down the road for another Congress to try to solve this problem. Because once this money is spent, we're still going to have the trust funds that are being depleted and not don't match what's necessary in order to fund those infrastructure projects across the board. So I voted against it, as did almost all Republicans. 13 Republicans voted in favor of it. I don't criticize them. That's their, they have to represent their constituents and their districts and so forth. I did find it interesting that one of the freshman representatives, young lady from New York, was explaining why she voted for it and stuff. And I don't criticize her on that, but her last comment was, and never forget, New York is going to get 10% of this infrastructure bill, over $100 billion. Well, that's a pretty good incentive, I guess, if that's your district. Believe me, Idaho is not going to get 10% or anywhere near that. But it also paved the way, I think, for them to pass this infrastructure bill, or this social infrastructure bill, the reconciliation or the Build Back Better plan, which I think is a complete disaster that they would be foisted upon us. I don't know that they've got the votes to pass this. I don't think they do, especially when you come in when it comes back to the Senate. You've heard about Joe Manchin and Christian Sinema and the problems that they have with it. And I think Joe Manchin is right. Before you vote on this, you really ought to have a CBO score, Congressional Budget Office score, so that you know what the cost of this proposal is going to be. As the president and others have said, oh, this won't cost you 1 cent. Well, I don't know how you spend $3 or $4 trillion and not have it cost you 1 cent. They said that it will be paid for by other taxes, and that if you make below $400,000, you won't be paying any more in taxes. That I find to be false. Every economist I know, and that's not everybody, but most of them that I know, have suggested that this is going to increase inflation. And if you saw the reports today, year-end inflation report is year over year was 6.2%, highest level this month, the highest level since in the last 30 years. I think that's going to grow and it's going to get worse. What that means is that everybody that buys a gallon of gas, that buys milk, that buys eggs, that buys beef or anything else is paying an inflation tax, because that's what it is. And that inflation tax is felt more by low-income people than it is by high-income people. So the idea that it's not gonna impact you if you make under $400,000 a year, I think is just a stretch of the imagination, to tell you the truth. I also don't like the way that they think they're going to pay for it. They're going to tax the rich to pay their fair share. Today, the top 10% of earners in this country pay 70% of the taxes. What is the appropriate level? What is their fair share? And then they say that, and I always like this, it's out of the top Fortune 500 companies, there was something like, I don't remember the exact number, but 47 of them paid no taxes last year. So therefore, we need to raise the tax rates. That's not a problem with the tax rates. If you double the tax rate, those 47 companies will still pay no taxes. It's not that the rates are too high, it's that there are too many gimmicks and loopholes in the tax code, and that's what you ought to be addressing if you're concerned about those 47 companies not being able to or not paying any taxes. Why would you raise the tax rates on everybody else? And in fact, if this goes through, I just saw a report that if this goes through, the United States will have the highest marginal tax rates of any country, developed country in the world. It'll be about 57% on the highest marginal tax rates. And in some states, when you take into consideration state taxes and so forth, like New York, it'll be 66%. That's the government taking 2/3 of every dime you earn. That to me is unconscionable. And it will make us less competitive. What we've spent the last 5 years trying to do is to make America more competitive. One of the most important portions of the Trump tax cuts that occurred in 2017 was that it lowered the corporate tax rate so that we weren't the highest taxed country in the world, and encouraged businesses to come back to the United States rather than offshore their production and so forth. And that was working. We were having companies come back to the United States. But those are the issues that we're gonna face in the coming weeks. Whether they can get this social infrastructure bill passed. If it doesn't pass the way the House looks like they might pass it, the Senate will change it somewhat, and we'll see what happens there. But I am truly concerned about the amount of money that we are spending, how far we are putting our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren's future in debt, and what it's going to do to the economy and the inflation of this country right now. And anybody that suggests it's not going to cause inflation, I don't think understands fundamental economics. You're paying for this by printing more money. When you print more money, it makes the money that's out there right now worth less, which means you have to pay more for the goods and services. That's the definition of inflation. So I think you're going to see more and more of that, and that's obviously going to be problematic for me and a lot of other Republicans. I don't know, haven't heard of any Republicans that plan on voting for this, just because we don't think it's moving us in the right direction. The other thing that has happened, as I sit on the Appropriations Committee, which was mentioned earlier. The one thing Congress has to do is pass a budget every year. We have to pass an appropriation every year to keep government functioning. The fiscal year starts October 1st of every year. I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I can tell you, I'm pretty sure, like maybe 85, maybe even 90% sure of when October 1st is going to come. It's going to come somewhere between September 30th and October 2nd. You would think we would be able to do our appropriation bills on time and get them done, knowing that October 1st is the beginning of the new fiscal year. That hasn't happened since 1994. This year, we passed the appropriation bills in the House, at least 9 of the 12. There's 3 of them that we couldn't get through. Senate hasn't passed any of them, and nobody is discussing how we reconcile the bills between the House and the markups that they've done in committee in the Senate to try to do the appropriations for the federal government for the next fiscal year. That's problematic, and that's something that we should be focused on. But the problem is everybody is focused, or the Democratic leadership is focused so much on the infrastructure bill and the social infrastructure bill, the reconciliation bill, that they've just kind of ignored our regular appropriations process. And that's the one job that Congress is responsible for doing and needs to do. So that's going to be a challenge. The funding for the government runs out on December 3rd. They're going to have to do another continuing resolution on that time, because the House and Senate and Republicans and Democrats, even within our own subcommittees, aren't even talking about the regular appropriation process. It's a complete breakdown in doing our job, and I've been very disappointed in that. And we'll see how that goes. They also have to deal with on December 3rd, the debt limit is reached, and they have to increase the debt limit. People will tell you that increasing the debt limit is just paying for spending that has already occurred. That's technically true, but what it does is it pays for the spending that's already occurred that gets you back up to zero, so that you can start spending more money, so that a year from now you can raise the debt limit again, or however long you've extended the debt limit. That's, again, problematic for the future of this country. We have to start getting back to where we're reducing the annual deficit, to where maybe we could get to a balanced budget eventually. I think we could, but it's going to be very difficult, and some tough choices need to be made. Some people think that we can balance this budget just by eliminating spending. The reality is in the annual appropriation process, if you just funded the Department of Defense, Veterans Affairs, and Homeland Security, and everything else you eliminated, we'd still have a budget deficit. You can't slash and burn your way out of the deficit that we find ourselves in. You can keep some restraints on spending, which is what you need to do, but you got to get the economy growing. If you don't have the economy growing, you're not going to ever balance this budget. If you remember the late 1990s, when we balanced the federal budget, the Clinton administration and the Republican Congress at the time balanced the federal budget for about 3 years in a row. It wasn't because they slashed and burned spending. It was because we had a booming economy. You all remember the dot-com bubble. There was more money coming into the federal government than the federal government actually knew what to do with. They were worried that they were getting so much money in that they wouldn't be able to buy back the debt, because the debt wouldn't come due in time to buy back the debt. And when the federal government has extra money, it's scary in that it usually means expanding programs. And I can tell you that when I look at this social infrastructure package, there might be some things in there that sound pretty nice, but expanding the federal government, how can you expand Medicare when right now predicted by 2027, Medicare is going to go broke? Shouldn't you take care of the basics in Medicare before you start looking at trying to expand it to lower the age from 65 to 60 and include dental and vision and hearing coverage and stuff? But this is Bernie Sanders' first step in trying to get Medicare for all. And maybe you agree with that, maybe you don't. I don't think it's a good way to go with healthcare in this country. But that's the first goal on this, is they want to get that started and move in that direction. And the other problem that you have, and I think this is what's happening, there are a lot of people who anticipate, and all the polls and everything else shows, that in 2022 elections, it's most likely Republicans are going to take back the House and maybe even the Senate. I believe that your progressive Democrats, your AOCs and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warrens and some of these others, know that once they get these programs in place, they're going to be virtually impossible to repeal. Republicans ran for a number of years on repeal Obamacare after it was first put in place. Republicans took control of the House and the Senate. We couldn't repeal Obamacare. It is hard to take back a benefit once it's given. If you start giving the enhanced child tax credit, very popular. You won't be able to take it back once it's put in place. When you start giving free child care, you won't be able to repeal that. When you expand Medicare, you're not going to go in and unfund the expansion of Medicare. They know that if they get these programs in place, and even if Republicans, who believe me, can snap defeat from the jaws of victory more often than I'd care to admit, but even if Republicans take back the House and the Senate, it would take a 2/3 vote to override a presidential veto if we tried to defund any of those programs or tried to repeal any of those programs. So they'll be in place for at least 3 years. And once they're in place, once the American public takes advantage of those programs, they're hard to repeal, even if it's the smart thing to do. So they know what they're doing in trying to push these programs as far as they can right now. And it has created a more partisan environment than I have ever seen in Congress. We were never consulted on any of these bills as to what was in them or anything else. And it's too bad that I think one of the challenges in Congress right now, and this is a criticism of both Republican and Democratic leadership, is that the decision making has been taken away from the committees, and it's all made in leadership's office now, whether it's Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi or whether it was Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell. The decisions are made in their offices instead of letting the committees do their job. The committees become the experts in certain areas, whether it's taxes with the Ways and Means Committee, or healthcare with the Commerce Committee, or energy with the Energy and Water Appropriations Committee and the Authorizing Committee. Let them do their job. And that we've been getting away from that. And I think we need to return to a system where we let the committees, the chairman introduces a bill, it goes to markup, and Republicans and Democrats offer amendments, and it improves the bill along the way. And that's how you get good legislation, because every program that's been successful in this country, every one that I can think of that has been successful and has been long lasting, has been bipartisan. There's been buy-in from both Republicans and Democrats. And that's just not happening now. I understand it somewhat in that Congress is kind of a reflection of the public at large, and we have a divided public at large. And almost any question you ask out there of the public, you'll get a 50-50 answer on it. And that makes it very, very difficult, which leads to, I think, what is the biggest challenge facing this country today. Is how do you tell whether the information you're getting is valid or not? We have so many different news sources on the right and on the left, and how does an individual? I mean, so many people get their news over the internet. How do you judge whether that's accurate or not accurate and stuff? And I think that's the biggest challenge that we face moving into the future. A couple other issues that are important that have been working on. One is one thing the pandemic has brought to light that a lot of us weren't as aware of as that we should have been, and that is the supply chain issue that we have in this country. Not only the supply chain of getting materials into the United States and what you're seeing at the ports and all that kind of stuff, and the lack of truck drivers, the trains that we don't have enough of to get the goods out of the ports and stuff. That is causing a real challenge in this country. I don't have the answer to how to fix this. It's a multi-pronged answer, I think, that's going to ultimately have to solve it. But the other one is the critical minerals and rare earths that we have in this country. And we are so dependent on countries that don't like us for many of those. That's China, Russia, and some other places, that we need to be developing the critical minerals and rare earths in this country. And we do have them in this country. Unfortunately, most of them are on public lands. And as you know, trying to get a mining permit to mine in this country is very, very difficult right now. Even though mining today is not the same as it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago or even 10 years ago. It's a pretty clean operation and environmentally sound operation in most cases. And so we need to start concentrating on how we address our reliance on foreign countries on critical minerals and rare earths. And those are a couple things that we're going to be working on. There's a couple of other issues that I understand that were going to be brought up and maybe have some questions about. Jeremy, did you have some questions about the Columbia Basin Initiative and stuff?
I do. And thank you so much for that DC update. I have about 24 questions I want to ask you to address that are all, you've presented a lot of issues, and I wish you well and the rest of our congressional leadership here in Idaho in addressing those. But yeah, Congressman, you've made some waves this year by talking about your concept to bypass 4 dams on the lower Snake River in Washington State in order to save salmon. Would you like to tell us why you decided to bring that issue to the forefront?
Yeah, it's been an interesting debate over the last year. In February, we released a concept, and let me tell you briefly how we got to the point that we're at. I sit and was chairman and now ranking member of the Energy and Water Appropriations Committee, and one of the things that we oversee is the public power administrations, the BPA, the TVA. There's one in the South also. And we don't really pay much attention to them as long as they're paying their debt and so forth to the Treasury. But I had some rural electrics come to me and say, well, every president, whether it was Bush, Obama, or Trump, recommended one of 3 things, and sometimes all 3 of them. 1, that we sell the Bonneville Power Administration. 2, that we allow that we sell at least their transmission lines. Or 3, that we allow their customers to buy power on the open market, get out of their contracts, essentially. We always thought that's kind of crazy, and we never allowed that. Then I started to have a few rural electrics come to me and say, we ought to be able to buy power on the open market. And I asked myself, why is that? We all know that hydropower is the cheapest power you can get. So we started looking into it. We found out that the Bonneville Power Administration is having some financial challenges. It's not the cheapest power that you can get. You can buy power on the open market cheaper than you can get it from the Bonneville Power Administration. So a lot of these rural electrics are going, wait a minute, I ought to be able to buy power out on the open market. And so we said, what's driving the cost of the Bonneville Power Administration? And if you don't think they're in trouble, their debt to asset ratio right now is at 99%. Their cash reserves are 50% of what they used to be. And they have about a 3-month supply of cash on hand, operating expenses, cash on hand. They never miss a payment to the Treasury, never have missed one, but the way they do it is by extending their debt out. And so it's kind of like paying for your mortgage with your credit card and then saying you're paying down your mortgage, but your total debt is going up. That's a problem. That's why in this last bill, they authorized increasing the borrowing limit from $7.7 billion for the BPA to $17.7 billion. But they didn't do any of the reforms that were necessary to put them back on a sound financial foot. So that's what got us started into this. And we said, okay, how are you going to reduce the cost of BPA power? It's the overhead costs that drive up their costs, whether it's fish mitigation, they spend $750 million a year on that, whether it's weatherization programs in the Pacific Northwest, whether it's the residential exchange rate that costs them $250 million every year, or it's the incredible amount of money they spend on salmon recovery lawsuits that go on and on and on, and it is a never-ending fight on these lawsuits. So we went to the people that always propose the lawsuits, and it's the plaintiffs in the lawsuits, and it's the tribes, some environmental groups, and for some reason the state of Oregon. And we started talking to them about what's it going to take to end this lawsuit mania and put a moratorium for a while on these lawsuits while we actually try to recover salmon. And they said, well, you got to do what's necessary to save salmon. So we started looking into the science of it. And for 2 years, we looked at it like, there's got to be a way to save these dams and save salmon. So we looked at everything that had been done, everything that had been proposed, why it hadn't worked, why other things wouldn't work, et cetera, et cetera. And I came to the same conclusion that about every fish biologist that I know of in the Pacific Northwest is that you're not going to save these salmon runs that are nearing extinction. You're not going to save these 4 Idaho salmon runs without taking the dams out. So that brought us to the question, okay, if you're going to take the dams out, what are the impacts? Because those dams have a value. You're going to have to replace the power. You're going to have to replace the transportation system. You're going to have to make Lewiston, Clarkston whole again because they're the inland port that's, miles and miles up the river and stuff. You're going to have to replace those benefits. And how you're going to end the lawsuits is actually by relicensing the rest of the dams in the Pacific Northwest that produce over 5 megawatts of power, because that's where most of the lawsuits occurs, when you relicense dams. I've used this example many times. Look at Idaho Power trying to relicense the Hells Canyon complex. They've been doing that for 25 or 30 years now. They spent 3 times as much relicensing these dams as it did to build that it cost to build the dams. That doesn't make sense to me. And they still haven't been relicensed yet for their 50-year license period. So to me, we've got to change the dynamics in southern Idaho, and this is the important part in southern Idaho. I ask my constituents down there, my farmers, my agricultural producers, what are the benefits of the dams that you see in southern Idaho, and what are the costs? The benefits, they would say, is, well, we get lower power rates because of them, because we buy Bonneville power. Well, okay, but you can buy lower power on the open market, and we can find ways to replace that power where we won't drive up your power rates. What are the other benefits that you get? Well, there's not really any. We lose our salmon, which come to my district, to Stanley Basin, Redfish Lake, and other places to spawn. We lose them. That's a huge economic impact to the outfitters and guides, to fishermen and others. It's a huge environmental impact by losing those salmon runs. And we send 487,000 acre feet of water down the river out of southern Idaho every year to flush salmon over the dams in order to recover salmon. The one thing it's not doing is recovering salmon. But that's 487,000 acre feet of water that's not usable in southern Idaho. We can't use it to recharge our aquifer, which is going down in its level. In fact, producers had to reduce their pump out of the Snake River aquifer by 13% this year, trying to stabilize it so it didn't go down further. So we can't use that water to recharge our aquifer. We can't use it for irrigation purpose or other industrial or municipal purposes that we might need in southern Idaho, because we just flush that water down the river. And that to me is I don't want to say criminal, but damn near. We ought to be able to use Idaho water for Idaho agriculture and Idaho needs instead of flushing that water down the river. And I can see no other way to do that than to do what's necessary to save these salmon. But this is the first proposal that I think anybody's made that actually recognizes that the dams have a value. And you're going to have to replace the stakeholders and make them whole to the extent possible. We can replace the power. We can replace the transportation system. We can replace the other benefits that the dams have. But the challenge is it means thinking outside the box. It means change. And change is difficult for people. I readily admit that. It's change for me. Change for me is as difficult as it is for anybody else. But we either design this future, our future for the Pacific Northwest, or it's going to be designed for us. So we put out in February this concept, and we put it out for discussion so that people could look at it and say, this is crazy, or this makes sense, or maybe you ought to change this, or you ought to change that. And we've been having this discussion for the last 9 months. It's one that will continue. They've started it in Washington with Senator Murray and Inslee to try to address it. The one other thing I would mention on this is that if you study the history of what happened in Europe and why they lost their salmon runs over there, and then 100 years later what happened on the Atlantic coast and why they lost their salmon runs in the Pacific or in the Atlantic coast, and then you look at what's happening today in the Pacific Northwest, it's the same discussion that's been going on for the last 300 years. Factors might change, but the problem is that there are so many things that affect salmon runs and the productivity of salmon runs that it's always easy to point to something else. And I'm sure if you bring this up, someone will say, hey, it is not the dams, it is the ocean conditions that's causing it. Or they will point to you and say, it's harvest. If we'd stop harvesting these fish, then there wouldn't be a shortage. They wouldn't be going extinct. And some people will say, no, it's the quality of the water in the river. And it's the predators. The reality is most fish biologists, I got a letter from 68 of the top fish biologists in the country that said, even if all of those other conditions were ideal, these fish are still going extinct with those dams there. And I'll give you this example. We put out a map, and we can send you copies of it if you'd like. But when these salmon are out in the Pacific Ocean, they go, as you know, they get flushed down the river. They go out in the ocean for 4 or 5 years, grow and take up nutrients and stuff. And then something clicks in their brain and says, I'm going to come back to Idaho to spawn, or I'm going to come back to my breeding grounds to spawn. They all enter the mouth of the Columbia River. Now remember, they've all been going through the same ocean conditions out in the ocean. Same conditions. They come back, there's the map. They come back and go over and these are salmon that are coming, some coming to Idaho, some coming to the John Day drainage, some to the Yakima River drainage. They come together, they go through the same predators, the same ocean conditions, they cross the first 3 dams, and those fish going to the John Day drainage, they take a right turn and go up the John Day River. How you measure the health of a salmon run is what's called a SARS. That's the smolt to adult ratio. That'll tell you what the health of the rate of the salmon run is. You would prefer to have a number between 4 and 6%. If it's less than that, it's still sustainable. If it gets down to about 2%, it means it's not really growing or it's not decreasing, but it's sustainable at 2%. It gets below 2%, you're headed toward extinction. Those that go up that have crossed the first 3 dams, those salmon go up the John Day drainage, and their SARS rate is 3.6%. Healthy run. Then they go over the 4th dam, the remaining fish go over the 4th dam, and those going up the Yakima take a left turn and go up the Yakima drainage. Their SARS rate is 2.7%. Still a healthy run. You'd like to see it higher, but it's still healthy and sustainable. It's not going extinct. But then Idaho's salmon that have been through the same ocean conditions, been across there through the same predator, been over the same 4 dams that the others have, take a right turn and go up the lower Snake River. They have to go over 4 more dams. After they cross that last dam, you know what their SARS rate is? 0.7%, 0.76%. They're headed toward extinction. That's why every fish biologist says it doesn't matter about these other factors. Yes, they do affect salmon runs, but these fish are going extinct with those 4 dams there. And we came to that conclusion and said, okay, I said this is a train wreck coming down the tracks. We need to deal with it before it runs over the top of us. I think we can design a system for the future, because we ought to. I said, I think 4 years ago or 3 years ago at the Andrews Center, my fear is that everybody would go back to their lives and say, well, that was kind of interesting presentation on salmon and so forth, but now how do I protect my own niche? Instead of saying, okay, this is what we've got. What do we want the Pacific Northwest to look like in 25 and 50 years? Are we going to design that future, or are we going to have somebody else, mainly a judge in a black robe, design it for us? This map shows the dams that would be relicensed for 50 years, which would make them exempt from the Endangered Species Act and the NEPA process, because that's where most of the lawsuits occur. And, you know, to me, that's a huge benefit to these things. There are some environmental groups that don't like it, that have said, hell no. And there are others that have said, nah, would prefer not to do that, but we understand the importance of removing these dams to salmon runs and stuff. So that's kind of the compromise we came up with. That's why we released this. That's why we're taking in public comment. We've learned a lot from the speeches that I've been out giving and talking to people and the individuals and groups about things that we hadn't considered and stuff. We'll continue to do that as we try to move this forward. But this is a solution that we need to come up with. And as I tell everybody I've talked to, if you got a better way to save these salmon, let me know. Don't keep it a secret. Let me know. Now, if you believe that, hell, we ought to just let these fish go extinct and then this will all be over, that's a legitimate point of view to have. It's just one I severely disagree with. And I think the people of the Pacific Northwest disagree with. But again, if you got a better idea of how you're going to save Idaho salmon runs from extinction, please let me know. Was that more of an answer than you wanted, Jeremy?
No, it was a wonderful answer. And I think a lot of, obviously this is a topic where people look at it and on first blush without having that background, I think you can understand concern, but really appreciate you framing and giving context to this issue.
Well, Jeremy,
where we are.
You're absolutely right that it is people's first reaction is, hell no, we're not going to do that. And I know that because that was my first reaction. As I said, we spent the first 2 years of doing this saying, God, there's got to be a way to save these dams and salmon at the same time. So I understand people's first reaction. I don't criticize them for it. I'm saying, let's discuss this.
Well, you've done this before. I mean, Boulder White Clouds was a huge lift and a lot of work with a lot of different stakeholders.
Yeah.
And where are you on the process right now, getting those stakeholders together? Obviously, you've had a lot of conversations, but what's your next steps in the process?
Well, I've been giving speeches all over, talking either individual people or with groups or associations, chambers of commerce. I was up in Coeur d'Alene a couple months ago, talked about to the Rotary Club up there about it and stuff. So there's people that are interested in it. There's a lot of people that are interested. Why the hell am I doing this? Because believe me, this would have been an easy one to walk away from. But I think that if you're in public office and you see a problem, you have a responsibility to try to solve it. And that's what. And the reason we put this out as a concept rather than as a piece of legislation. Piece of legislation would have mean, hey, we're ready to go. We got all the answers here, and we're ready to move this forward. We put this out as a concept so we could take input from people that had ideas how we could do this better and changes that we made in this. And right now, we're still giving the talks around. We're talking to people. We're talking to people in the Pacific Northwest, and we will at some point in time, I think, start writing some legislation so that you actually have something that you're looking at. And that's where we're moving. But I noticed that one of my goals originally was one of the things we were looking at anyway was that when Biden got elected, they were talking about doing this infrastructure bill. And we said, well, why not put $33 billion that it takes to do this, our estimate on what it takes to do this, why not put that in the infrastructure bill? And I thought that I would get support, frankly, and I don't mean this in a partisan way, but I thought I would get support from Governor Inslee and Senator Murray and Senator Cantwell, because for about 5 or 6 or 10 years, all they've been talking about is saving orca and salmon. Every time they're on TV, I mean, Jay Inslee ran a campaign for president on saving salmon runs. So I thought they'd be a little more excited, but I don't think they like a conservative Republican from Southeast Idaho proposing this and getting in their bailiwick. So what they didn't get excited about it, and they consequently killed any idea of trying to put the resources into the infrastructure bill. Now they've put together a committee that is going to report back to them on the challenges of removing the dams and how you would overcome those challenges if you decided to do this. They're supposed to report by next July. But I can tell you that there's an urgency to this. And even Governor Inslee admits this, that there is an urgency that this needs to get done one way or another. We need to decide what we're going to do relatively quick because we don't have that much time left. Fish biologists would tell me you got about 3 generations, maybe 4 generations of salmon before they go extinct in the Idaho salmon runs anyway. And that translates into 16 to 20 years.
I was up in Redfish Lake this summer, snorkeling, swimming, and I couldn't help but think of what would it be like to see a sockeye in there, an actual redfish where the lake got its name.
Wouldn't it be nice to see why they named Redfish Lake, or why
it would be incredible,
or why they named the Salmon River the Salmon River?
Yeah. No, I mean, this is every sportsman. I think every sportsman can relate to that thought and that desire. And so moving forward, I mean, you talked about your challenges with some maybe unlikely bedfellows that fell through, but who are your strongest allies in this so far?
Well, Governor Brown of Oregon has been very supportive of this, and Earl Blumenauer from Portland, the Democrat, has been very supportive of this. We've been working together, trying to figure out a strategy on all this kind of stuff. I have had several Democratic colleagues from Washington and Oregon that have come up to me and said, I like what you're doing on these salmon. I think it's a good discussion, one that we need to have. I just can't say that out loud because my constituents aren't there yet. I understand that. But I'm getting more support than you would think. There are a few that are obviously very opposed to it. Representative Newhouse and Representative Kathy McMorris Rogers, these dams are in their district. And I keep hearing, well, why would an Idaho congressman from Southeast Idaho be trying to take out dams in Washington? You stay out of my district, I'll stay out of your district. And I told him, that's fine. That's a philosophy I generally agree with, but what you're doing in your district is killing the fish in my district. That's the problem. And so we've had discussions about this. I've kept them fully informed on what we're doing. But I will tell you, part of the strongest tribe is part of the strongest supporters of all this. And I was just talking to them this morning. I've been doing this now in a serious effort, trying to address this issue in the last 4 or 5 years that we've been looking at it. There are environmental groups that have been doing it for 20 or 30 or 40 years. The tribes have been doing it since the beginning of time, since those dams first went in. Tribes are the biggest supporters of this. And every Native American tribe in the Pacific Northwest has signed a treaty with the United States government. They retained their fishing rights in their locations of their traditional fishing habits. To them, this is not just trying to save a species. This is about their culture, their heritage, their religion. It is important to them. And I have been very proud of the work that they've done. And I will tell you right now, if it hadn't been for the work of the Shoshone-Bannock, the Nez Perce tribes, and others, we wouldn't be having these discussions because these fish would be extinct today. One thing I do not want to happen in Idaho is what's happening right now in the Klamath Basin. In the Klamath Basin, this has been an issue for a number of years. There's 4 dams on the Klamath River. They're owned by PG&E, and they came up with an agreement to remove the dams. The tribes were going to give their water rights or suspend their water rights to the farmers in the area, which tribes never do. They never subordinate their water rights. We're going to subordinate them to the farmers in the area. The environmentalists, we're going to get the dams removed. The tribes are going to get about 200,000 acres of forest lands to manage for the tribe. They all came to this agreement. They brought it back to Washington. Washington rejected it because it called for the removal of those dams. Now those dams are coming out. PG&E has taken those dams out, and none of those benefits are going either to the farmers or the tribes or anything else. And I don't want to see that happen to us, where we can design a solution that fits us, that fits the Pacific Northwest, that doesn't harm anybody to the extent that we can't compensate them for that and find alternatives to that. I don't want a judge to come in and just say, we're gonna take these dams out.
We've got a few comments from our broadcast, and questions about what the impact of steelhead would be on this project as well.
It helps all of the endangered runs that are in the Pacific Northwest. And I got to tell you, a lot of the times, in fact, when I started talking to some of the tribes, it was, well, you're just talking about the 4 Idaho runs that are endangered. There are something like 13 runs that are endangered in the Columbia Basin. I noticed that Marie Cantwell got $2.5 billion in this last infrastructure bill for salmon recovery. And that's good. That's a good thing, because the salmon in the Puget Sound and other areas are endangered. Now, they don't need dams removed there. They've removed one, the Elway Dam, but they need to improve water quality and so forth. But none of that $2.5 billion is going to save Idaho salmon runs, because none of that $2.5 billion is going to go toward removing dams. And that's, as far as I can tell, I've become convinced, the only way that you're going to save these salmon runs. Now, and again, I will say, if you got a better idea, let me know. But it will help steelhead runs also, and lamprey also.
Okay, that's wonderful. Congressman, we only have 5 more minutes with you, and we, very grateful for your participation and letting us know about what's going on the Hill. I just wondered, one last follow-up question. We have the infrastructure bill. It's been passed by the House. Obviously, a lot of people are paying attention to the Virginia governor race to see what, how the Biden administration would view that as a barometer, or put their finger in the wind of how things are going. And, obviously Build Back Better still going forward. They've pared it down a little bit. You mentioned that maybe the CBO, once we get that, we'll have a better idea what the actual cost is. But are there enough moderates in the Democratic Party to step back from that and ask if there really is the mandate to get that passed through Congress? Do you think it's going to move forward?
I think they'll try to move it forward, but I would be surprised if they passed this Build Back Better plan without significant modifications of it. I think the CBO's floor is going to come back, and the way they got the cost down was not by saying, okay, we're not going to do this program or that program. What they said is, when we score a program, it's over a 10-year period. What's it going to cost over the next 10 years? If you're going to do a tax reduction, how much revenue are you going to lose over the next 10 years versus how much you might get from increased activity, economic activity, or something like that. But it's over a 10-year window. What they did is they said, okay, this child tax credit is only good for, I can't remember the numbers, but this child tax credit is only good for 4 years, then it's going to sunset. Well, we all know it's not going to sunset in 4 years. It's going to go on for 10 years. Or they say that the enhanced or the child care is we're going to put that program in place for 5 years, and then it's going to sunset. We all know that's not going to sunset. So you got to score these out over 10 years. With honest scoring, I think you'll find this is substantially more expensive. But obviously, I guess one of the challenges for the future is the Republican Party has moved further to the right as a whole in Congress, and the Democratic Party has moved way, way further to the left. When I first got elected, there were what they called the Blue Dog Democrats. That was the conservative Democrats. And frankly, I worked with them. So did most Republicans work with them. You could work across the aisle with them. There were 70 of them, and they had to limit their number because everybody wanted to be a blue dog. There were 70 blue dogs. Today, I think there's 2 blue dogs left. And I just heard this morning on a news report that the American Conservative Union, and remember this is scored by them, they scored the Democrats how often they vote for what they believe to be conservative values and stuff. And in I think it was 2012 or something like that, it was like 20%. They got a 20% score in conservative voting. Then it went down to 16%. Then it went down to 12%. This last Congress, it was down to 3%. So they're moving further and further to the left. And to some extent, the Republicans are moving further and further to the right. And that means there's not many people working across the aisle trying to solve problems. That's something that I've tried to do my whole career. That's why we passed the Ag Immigration Reform Modernization Act in a bipartisan way in the House. It's now sitting in the Senate. And of course, I can tell you that that if you bring up the word immigration, it's almost toxic right now because of what's going on at our southern border. But it's something that needs to get done for agriculture in Idaho and in this country. But it was a bipartisan effort. Republicans and Democrats, 4 of us on each side, sitting down and working out the differences and talking to producers, talking to the labor groups and others. And we came up with a pretty damn good bill. Perfect? No, I don't know of any perfect bill. But we did a pretty good job of it.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for your time. We're going to have you back so that we can hear you talk about the solutions for all these sticky problems. But
yeah.
The Boise Metro Chamber, we thank you so much for your service.
Well, thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for inviting me. I always enjoy talking to the Boise Metro Chamber, and I long for the day when we can meet in person, actually. At least then I get a free lunch.
There you go. We're looking forward to that, too. We'd also like to say one final thank you. Of course, this is possible because of our presenters and our presenting series sponsor, Blue Cross of Idaho, and other sponsors, Intermountain Gas Company, Bank of Idaho, and St. Luke's. Thank you, everyone, and thank you again, Congressman, for your time.